I've been cooking up this one for quite some time. Welcome to my Age of Wonders 4 review, a game that I think could very well deserve the title of Strategy Game of the Year. I'm not going to muck you around at the start though, let's jump in and talk about what it is and why it's so special. And if you like this kind of content, be sure to subscribe because there's plenty more where that came from. First up, I'd like to touch on customization, the start of a game, essentially, factions and realms. Here we see the beginning scenario as well as some story realms that I found to actually be really fun and really engaging. As you move through, there are different types of realm though, of course, with different environments, potentially different enemies that can spawn, or different victory conditions. The level of customization within the official realms alone around victory and how they're built is fantastic. But I think really the strength is not within these existing ones, but rather in setting up your own. I'll show you a few clips here of the different things that you can do, from defining one of those presence traits, those victory conditions, of course customizing the number of players, the environment, the enemies, but also specific victory conditions can be turned on and off, which I'm sure many of you will be pleased, and AI. Specific AI can scale their difficulty up or down. So there's a huge amount of world building here, and we'll return to that in a minute. But of course, I would be amiss to not mention the fact that you can also create an entire race, right? You start by choosing a physical form for your species or your faction, move through to different things like body and mind traits, but really the customization comes in once you start getting into the nitty-gritty around their culture, for example. There are 6 different cultural affinities in Age of Wonders 4, and they affect all kinds of things, from the buildings that you can build, your alignment, good or evil, and how you develop your empire. It's a system that might seem a little bit overwhelming at first, and I think you'd be right in feeling that way. But in my experience, it really didn't take long to get used to it, partly because the game's tooltips are fantastic at describing it, and also partly because this system, these affinities, are woven throughout other parts of the game, which we'll discuss in a few moments. But they're woven through in such a way that you kind of feel that you're relating to them quicker than other, perhaps complex mechanics in similar 4X or strategy games more broadly. The customization reaches right through into the story as well, where you choose if you're a wizard king or a champion. And that's where the core gameplay begins, because let's not forget that Age of Wonders 4 is a 4X strategy game, and that means the city building or civilization building that you may already know and love. As your cities gain extra population, you can expand out to extra territories and improve them with a set of improvements. It scales really well and it rewards growth. And of course, when you first spawn in and as you play through the game, you'll be met with your armies, your scouts, and you'll have to reach through the fog to uncover the world around you. While you're doing that, you'll be building buildings, training units, and generally building up your city's yields. All of those core mechanics that you may already know and love from 4X strategy games really shine through here. They're quite simple, they're quite easy to understand. You get boosted bonuses for focusing in cities, but it's never too late in Age of Wonders to shift a focus, to shift to perhaps a different affinity or a different victory pathway, something we'll also discuss a little bit later in this video. One of the other parts of not just developing your city as you move around and explore and find things around the map is also developing your empire, because of course the idea is that you want to grow big and strong and tall, like I have in this conveniently placed clip right here. One part of that, and again, this is where the affinities really shine, is the empire development tree, where you spend a currency that they call Imperium to pick up nice little benefits. The benefits align with your affinities, and some of them are long-running throughout the entire game, others are one-off abilities. But the real core here is that how you've set up your faction and the things you've chosen to research, which we'll get to in a minute, will impact these development trees and how you branch out. Speaking of research, in this game you research magic. It's the science, if you will, if you're a 4X gamer, and it's a really core part of the game, unlocking new units potentially for you to summon, buffs and abilities for your existing units, or actually changes to your species as a whole. It's a really interesting system. And of course, then you get through into dealing with everybody else, right? The AI opponents, who seem fairly strong, although I think some tuning could be done at the higher end to make them a bit stronger, are pretty good at engaging in diplomacy. And the diplomacy system, as you can see on screen, is fairly easy to use. You build up empire relations, up through from dastardly ones right up the way through very trusting. And you also have a war justification balance where these grievances come into play. If you expand too fast or trespass on their domain, you might have to pay them off to buy them back into your good books, or let it linger for war. Free cities, or city-states, also exist. They are very powerful. You can ally up with them by giving them a Whispering Stone and reap a whole load of their rewards, or trade with them, or you can integrate them into your empire. And there are loads of story events that go along with them as well. They are a nice addition. What's also a nice addition is the combat system. So as you move around the map, of course, you can move in up to stacks of 6 units. But once you jump into combat, everyone is out on their own. At a max of 18 versus 18 units, it can get pretty hectic on the battlefield as well. There's lots of different attacks, movement abilities, and of course, spells, which are incredibly important. You can use defensive moves or aggressive ones as you try and sort of plot your way around the battlefield. That does have some hazards around it, so take care. There's also an auto-resolve function if you don't feel like jumping into the nitty-gritty, positioning every unit as you go. That function I've found to be quite user-friendly. It works really well. So too does the Siege UI, where you can build siege projects and get a quick overview at your combat strength versus theirs to find out if you might need to bring in extra units or perhaps bust down those walls. Overall, the combat system is very user-friendly. There's a start over function, time control functions. The auto battle seemed to work actually pretty well, touch wood. I found it to work quite well to reflect my combat strength and theirs, and you can choose to manually intervene at any time, as well as, like I say, retreating, replaying, and all sorts. The combat system is very user-friendly, despite having a lot of depth and detail, particularly once you start to unlock a myriad of different spells that can have huge impacts on the battlefield. Once you move through, though, you'll start to discover more of the world. Ancient wonders exist throughout that can give you powerful tiles, and if you manage to clear them or befriend them, however you want to approach the specific event, you also get potentially some goodies for your character. Your heroes will also, of course, be leveling up throughout, so they might appreciate it if you find a great big greatsword and give it to them, or perhaps you choose to plunder. The audio and visual storytelling that goes throughout the entire game, I think, is very good. Soundtrack is nice, the visuals look great. There are some gripes around the edges for me. Most of them are fairly minor, but certain things like there's no auto-renew option for trade when you're trading with free cities. I also tend to misclick when armies are stacked on top of a city. I find sometimes there are a few sort of difficulties around clicking into things or having things repeat. The Pantheon system, which is actually a nice segue as we move into talking about victory, is what happens when you win. You can choose to ascend your ruler and unlock certain things. It's a fairly bare bones system. I suspect there'll be some critiques around it, perhaps needing to be more meaningful. I ultimately didn't find it to be that big of a deal, but also it didn't really entice me much. What did entice me were the 4 victory conditions: military, expansion, magic, and then score, which is kind of just a backup one. So really, you're shooting for 3. The military victory, as you would expect, might involve quite a bit of combat. You need to take down the enemy throne cities and defeat their ruler while their throne city is captured to remove them from the game. Worth noting, though, that your allies don't need to be captured. You can ally up with other factions and move through and win together in glorious harmony as you bring your toady along with you. So it's a nice touch because it doesn't lead to this necessarily nefarious on and on marching units around the map. You will probably run into more units with the other 2 victories, though, expansion and magic. Despite being very different things, they end up working out in the same way. You end up with 3 structures within your empire that you need to defend once they're completed, or you've cast a spell, in the case of the magic victory, for 15 turns. They may cause enemies to declare war on you, and hostile units, AI ones, will spawn automatically around them every few turns. With the magic victory, you're building up, once you research a tier 5 tome, the maximum level of tomes, to cast the Age of Astral spell, and that will sort of activate your 3 beacons, and then you have to defend them. The expansion victory, instead of researching for a tome and sort of upgrading through that research tree, you instead need to, as you can imagine, grab as much of the world as you can. It'll vary depending on how many tiles are in the world, but you can check it at any time on the victory screen. Overall, it works pretty similarly though. Defend your 3 objectives for 15 turns. Once you've captured X number of territories, the majority, I believe, of the map, and you'll be victorious. And then, like I say, if no one wins at the turn limit, if you've got the most score, you win. And now, time for my wrap-up, my conclusions and my own thoughts on Age of Wonders 4 in this review. I think that the level of customization and replayability on offer is exceptional. Not just from the faction creation at the start, but from the sort of role-playing storytelling elements that are bled through, not just through the races and the cultures, the affinities, but also through the storytelling of the world. Every playthrough is different, and I'm yet to stumble upon a moment where I feel a little bored despite having days into the game. I think that performance was good from me. I'm hoping it'll be good on lower end systems too. I rarely ran into any crashes or glitches, and overall I think it's a solid experience. I think that there's DLC potential absolutely out the wazoo here in terms of maps or races and all sorts. They already have an expansion pass announced and ready to roll, at least comms-wise, I believe. But it's not needed for the core experience. This is not an early access game in disguise. This is a game that runs very well. It met my expectations. In fact, it exceeded my expectations. I'm generally a fan of more historical strategy games. Fantasy is not completely unusual to me, nor is sci-fi, but it's not something I'd gravitate to. Age of Wonders 4 left me pleasantly surprised, and that would be an understatement. I think it's a strong contender for Strategy Game of the Year, and a brilliant buy. Thanks for watching.